Hello, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be making a vintage style skirt with embroidered pockets. I recently came across this image on Pinterest of some embroidered jean pockets, so it looks like there's flowers coming out of the pocket, and it's just the cutest thing I've ever seen. Since I saw that image, I tried doing it on the pocket of a jean skirt for a local boutique in my town, and now I just need to do it on everything because it just is so whimsical and cottagecore-y. The kind of skirt I'm going to be making is incredibly simple, so it's a really good option for people who are new to sewing. So I have this really beautiful blue gingham fabric that I found at the thrift store, and it totally reminds me of Dorothy's dress from The Wizard of Oz. Before we start making this skirt, I'm going to get out my sketchbook and I'll show you the design that I have in mind. Okay, I've drawn a little mannequin shape here to draw the skirt on. Part of why this skirt is so simple is because it's made entirely of rectangles. So you have the waistband, and then the body of the skirt is just made of a really big rectangle that's gathered into the waistband. And then for the embroidered pockets that we're going to incorporate, I want these to be patch pockets. So you basically just make a little rectangle of fabric and hem it, and then sew it on sort of like a patch, but you leave the top opened. So I put a little patch on each side, and then there will be little embroidered daisies coming out of each of them. Now that you can see what the plan is, let's start cutting out the pieces. For the dimensions of the main rectangle that make up the skirt, you need to decide on two measurements. First, you need to decide on how long you want your skirt to be, and then add a little bit of seam allowance. For the other measurement, you just need the measurement of your waist times at least 3, but it can be longer than that as long as you have enough fabric. The next piece you need is, of course, the waistband. For the length of your waistband, you just need your waist measurement, then add a little bit of seam allowance and an extra inch for overlapping for the closure. For the width of the waistband piece, you need to decide how wide you want the finished waistband to be, add some seam allowance, and then double it. So if I want the finished waistband to be 2 inches wide, then I need to add a little bit of seam allowance, 2.5 inches, and then double it, 5 inches.
Last Friday he was terse with me, 'cause I did not salute.
The last two pieces that I need are the pockets. The size of the pockets is totally up to you, just make sure that you can fit your hand inside them.
I said I thought, dear Captain, that you still...
Now let's start sewing the pieces together. The first thing you're going to want to do is take your really big rectangle and gather it along one of the long edges. As I usually do, I'm going to be doing this by hand, but you can totally do this with a machine as well.
Out the rank and file, send out the brave old territorio, they'll face the danger with a smile, send out the boys on...
Once I had the big piece gathered to about the same length as the waistband, I started pinning the waistband on. Don't forget that if your fabric has a good side and a bad side, you pin the waistband on right sides together. Normally with hand sewing, I take the easy way and just use a running stitch for basically everything, but when you're attaching something that's gathered, I highly recommend using a back stitch, and that's what I used for this. Once you finish sewing that seam, flip the waistband over and start felling it to the inside of the skirt. Don't forget to leave a little bit of seam allowance on the ends of the waistband so that you can sew them closed. Here's how the skirt's coming along. It's currently entirely open. I did hem these edges right here where the closure is going to be. This way, as I did in my circle skirt video, I can overlap these edges and then a few inches down start stitching it closed. Then there will be a little overlapped section right here where we can sew in some buttons. We're going to do that a little later, but for now we're going to leave it open to make it easier to sew on the pockets. The way we're going to make the pockets is by taking your pocket square and hemming it all the way around. Then you can pin it where you want it on the skirt and do a whip stitch around the edge to attach it. So I'm going to start hemming both of my pocket squares and attaching them to the skirt. So I have now attached the pockets to the skirt. You can't really see them that well because I matched up the pattern, but they are there. I'm going to leave the embroidery to the last step, so now I'm going to actually attach the skirt to itself, you know? So basically what I'm going to do is overlap the back of the skirt by about 1 inch or 1.5 inches all the way down, and then starting a couple inches down, I'm going to start whip stitching it to close it. Before I actually started sewing up the back of the skirt, I pinned it to make sure that it was evenly overlapped all the way down.
Hello, hello there, who's your lady friend?
I've now closed up the back of the skirt. Now I'm going to start sewing in the buttons and the buttonholes. I think I'm just going to use some little blue buttons. And then the actual structure of the skirt will be done and we can start working on the embroidery.
voices ring, and all together sing, are we downhearted? No! Not for Britannia.
Okay, the skirt itself is done. We have some buttons and buttonholes in the back, and now we need to start on the embroidery. I'm going to try my best to walk you through the different stitches that I'm going to use to embroider these daisies. There are 3 primary stitches. Oh yeah, I just want to mention real quick that if your skirt has a raw edge on the bottom, then you'll want to use this time to hem it. I have the selvage of the fabric on this skirt, so I don't actually need to. For the embroidery, I'm going to be using these 3 different colors of embroidery floss. I'm going to be using this green for the stems and the leaves. This kind of embroidery floss can't be divided into different strands, so I'm just going to be using its entire thickness. Then I'll be using this white embroidery floss for the petals of the daisies, and this pale orangish yellow for the center of the flowers. I'm going to be embroidering all of the daisies freehand, but you can absolutely draw them out first using a pencil or a fabric marker. Starting with the stem, poke your needle up from the inside of the skirt. Not right at the top edge of the pocket, but a couple inches inside so that you can't see the end of the stem. The stitch for the stem is just a back stitch, and if you're not sure how a back stitch works, it's very similar to a running stitch. But every time you pull the needle back up through the fabric, you go back 1 stitch to fill in the empty space. To add some leaves to your stem, just stitch a few lines right next to each other to create a small oval. Then all you have to do is fill your pocket with stems. You can also put a few stems on the front of the actual pocket to make it look like the flowers are hanging over the edge a little. For the center of the daisies, I decided to go with a cluster of French knots. This is a super fun stitch once you get used to it, but it can take a little bit of practice at first. Pull your thread up through the fabric and then wrap the base of the thread around your needle about 3 times. Then put your needle back into the fabric just a couple of millimeters next to where you started. The finished stitch is a cute little knot of thread. Then just continue to do those French knots next to each other to make a little cluster. If you've never done this stitch before, you'll definitely want to try it out a few times on a scrap piece of fabric before doing it on your actual project. To finish off the daisies, just stitch a line for each individual petal of the flower. Embroidering all these daisies can take quite some time, but I definitely think it's worth it for the finished result. I think to embroider both of the pockets, it took me about 3 days total. Now that the daisies are done, let's take a look at the finished result of this skirt. That is the finished product of this gathered vintage skirt. As of filming this, I actually finished this skirt a little while ago, so I've had a few chances to wear it, and I am absolutely in love with it. I was with my cousin and I was wearing this, and she was like, it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland plus Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and I was like, my work here is done. I love these embroidered pockets so much, and I just like anything that has pockets. You should consider doing this too because it's freaking adorable. As I said before, this is an incredibly beginner-friendly project if you want to learn how to draft your own patterns. It's made entirely of rectangles, but it still has a really nice vintagey silhouette. And now, if I want to do some sort of like Dorothy Gale character bounding situation, I know exactly what to wear. I really hope you found this video useful in some way, or maybe you just enjoy watching people make stuff with no intention of making it yourself, and that's cool too. Real quick before I finish off the video, I'd like to mention that I have this email where you can send me strange vintage and antique fashions for me to react to in a video. That would be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment, rate, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! I can't find my scissors. Where are my scissors? If I told you that I had like a camera and a microphone and a tripod and everything, you might think, oh well then it's a reasonably professional setup. But then you would see that my mic is attached to my camera with elastic bands because it's a cheap one from Amazon and it broke and I had to attach it again with Scotch tape and that didn't work so great. So, sure, professional.